announcements? Do we have any announcements? Not hearing any announcements. Do we need to make any changes to the agenda as it's currently written? Okay. Given that, do we have a motion to approve the agenda as written for April 10th, 2025?
Yes.
So moved.
We have a move and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for March 2025 meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Aaron.
For a second? We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the minutes? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes for the March meeting of 2025, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes are approved. We'll now open the meeting to any public comment. And we will close the meeting to public comments since we had not. Next item on the agenda is a VPIC update.
Thanks, Tom and Eric, for making the time to join us on short notice. Really appreciate it.
No problem, Tim. Thanks, John. Thanks, group. It's been a strange week. I'll let Eric talk about that. I think we've had some. I did want to highlight a couple legislative actions that just highlight what's going on in the legislature this year. There hasn't been any continuation of the divestment bill, so that didn't make it over crossover. So I don't think we'll have any issue with that this year. We did ask for an additional amount of money this year for the compensation study. I know we had talked about this before where we were trying to incrementally increase it because we feel that's one of our biggest risks, being at only the 10th percentile from our comp study. So we are working forward with that. It is in our budget, so we're thankful for support there. And the markets, we were doing well up until a couple weeks ago. We were up about 7% year to date fiscal year. But I'll let Eric talk about where we're at right now. I think we're really well diversified and we have good liquidity. But Eric, I'll give it to you to talk the bad news.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is that when crises like these happen, we're in a pretty good situation where we don't actually have to do anything. The doing that needs to be done is when we design our strategic asset allocation so that in advance of these situations, when they do arise, we're prepared for them. They're very difficult to try to predict, and especially when you think about the timing and magnitude of them. So there's trying to position the portfolio ahead of them or during them is a fool's errand. A couple of things have been very protective to us during this drawdown. When we designed our strategic asset allocation, 70% of the fund is in return-seeking assets. These are the long-term return drivers. About 1/3 of that portion of the portfolio is illiquid. So during an economic drawdown or an equity drawdown like this, our private market exposures do not reprice. Arguably, if common stocks have declined in value, the private companies in which we're invested are worth less. But because they're not marked to market daily, that gives us more time to figure out exit strategies and for our general partners to manage around them. The 2/3 portion of the risk asset pool is largely in common stocks, most of it indexed. Since the end of February, when Tom mentioned that almost 7% return, that portion of the portfolio is down about 9%. There's another portion of the portfolio that we call downturn hedging assets. It's about 20% of the fund. This is invested in high quality investment grade bonds, mortgages, and treasuries, core bonds. That part of the portfolio is performing exactly as intended. While the equities are off 9% since the end of February, the core bond exposure is down about 1%. So much like during the COVID 2020 equity sell-off, when global equities sold off by 30%, we used this core bond allocation to provide liquidity. Same thing's happening now. The intent of this is not to generate returns, but to really buffer us against these downturns and provide a source of liquidity. What we did do this month is actually raise money for your retirement payments early. Typically, we wait till the middle of the month. We did that as we started to see volatility in the bond market and started to get concerned over liquidity over treasuries. We're monitoring the situation very closely. Year to date through this morning, portfolio is still in positive territory, up between 0.5% and 1 percentage point. So the protective measures that we put in place are, I would say, working and operating as intended. We continue to monitor markets for liquidity, especially the treasury market and the market for investment grade bonds. And so far, we're not seeing any signs of trouble there. These periods of volatility do come along. We've lived through many of them. If you think back to the Russian default crisis in the late 90s, the tech bubble, great financial crisis in 2007-8, the taper tantrum, COVID, we've been through these before. The key to really maximizing long-term returns and managing risk is to make sure that you've designed your portfolio in advance so that you understand how it will perform during these situations and that you can live with those outcomes. And we're certainly in that situation. Happy to take any questions.
Well, somebody else have a question?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask the same question I asked Eric this morning, which is just if he could reflect a little bit on VPIC's, strategy with respect to U.S. versus international
sure.
holdings, and talk about how that has worked for us here.
Yep. Unlike many of our peers in our broad equity index exposure, we do not have a home country bias. Many public pension funds will overweight U.S. stocks and underweight European stocks. We've intentionally avoided that because while valuations can diverge and have been divergent, for example, U.S. equities have been overvalued relative to Europe for a very long time. Those dislocations can persist for a very long time, and then they can revert very quickly. So like we don't try to time the portfolio around dislocations like this, we don't try to time movement in regional valuations of equities. That gives us essentially global equity beta and has been protective, especially in the early phases of this drawdown, where U.S. was down significantly more than Europe. That was protective in the early days. It's since caught up a little bit. But we still believe that current valuations are drivers of long-term future returns, and we still believe that it will benefit us by being invested in portions of the market that are, quote, cheaper than the U.S. over the long term. Again, for a very long time, 10 years, maybe more than that, U.S. had a higher PE ratio than Europe. And within the last, I would say year or so, many institutional investors had been trying to convince themselves that maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe because the U.S. was the world's deepest and most liquid market and free market, that maybe it warranted a higher PE. We were skeptical of that. We've looked at it a number of times and continue to come back to our global equity allocation. And I think we're seeing that now, where while U.S. has been the freest and deepest market, that trend may change, hopefully for the short term, but may change as well.
The strategy that VPIC is using, you folks have been sort of tweaking this over the past 5 years, and modifying it than what you had been doing before, again, looking at the risk.
Sure. So we have been tweaking. In 2019, we did a pretty major overhaul of the portfolio, terminated a lot of our active public market managers, active stock pickers, for example. The bar for outperformance on those guys is pretty high. Their fees are high. And over time, what we had seen was that these managers paying, some of them 100 basis points in fees, just weren't able to add value over the indexes above and beyond their fees. So we indexed a large portion of the equity exposure. We also began to ramp up our exposure to illiquid assets, ramping up private equity from, at the time, 2% to 5% to now 10% and now an 11% target. Similarly, with private credit, began to build that exposure out a few years ago, and we now have 11% targets to both private equity and private credit. We're pretty much fully allocated to those asset classes now. It took us a while to build up that exposure over time. We feel pretty good about the allocation as it is, and this year is the first year where we're not recommending any changes to the allocation. Again, every year since 19, we've recommended some small tweaks, but this year we're really staying put. Consultants and we are looking at modeling some other potential scenarios just to make sure we're in the right place. But at this point, we feel like the targets are where they should be.
Excellent. Yeah, I remembered the discussion of when you folks were going to move more to the index funds, and that was going to be my guess was about five years ago.
Right, and that move has paid off for us. Fees have come down significantly, and our performance has improved significantly. When we look at the latest performance report, which is as of the December quarter, we are well above median for the 1, 3, 5, 7, and I think 10-year periods. So the moves that we put in place are definitely paying off.
Now's a good time to buy.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. So now's a good time to kind of stick to your long-term strategic plan.
Exactly. Well, given the climate we're in, and it certainly shows that VPIC has done its homework, long-term planning, and it's paying off.
Yeah, we're always cognizant of the cash flow needs for each of the individual plan, particularly teachers, and so we really do manage to our liabilities, and so we always are conscious of that. And I think that's been the hallmark of our annual review process, really to make sure we don't ever have to sell any of our equities during periods like this, and we always have alternative sources, specifically bonds or inflation hedging assets to provide us that cash flow need.
Other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming at such short notice to fill us in on the craziness of what's currently happening in the markets.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if we could just carry on with this subject for just a minute longer.
Absolutely.
As you know, we, in addition to the pension funds that VPIC manages in the Treasurer's office here, we have some, what were small just a few years ago, but now substantially growing OPEB funds due to our pre-funding program. Those funds are primarily managed by Jeremiah Breer here in consultation with our investment consultant, RVK. We use the same one as VPIC. And so I've asked Jeremiah just to say a couple words today on the OPEB funds as well.
Good afternoon. So my job is made pretty easy here by following Eric, because the OPEB portfolio is very similar to the VSTRS portfolio, and so pretty much everything that Eric has laid out there for you applies here. I will just add a couple pieces of additional color. So we do have an all-weather portfolio, so it is designed to contemplate that there are these volatile times where you see downturns in the market, and it is also designed to contemplate that there are better days, and on the long term is designed for a long-term positive return, balancing those risks over time. And the portfolio is working as it was designed. So one of the pieces that are in there is that you have a risk asset bucket that is primarily oriented towards growth, and then we are also invested in the fixed income markets, which provide some ballast in times like these. Traditionally, fixed income markets and risk assets move in opposite directions. So when the stock market is up, bonds are down. When stock market is down, bonds are up, and that helps to counterbalance some of those losses. That is not always the case. There have been some notable periods in history where both stocks and bonds went down at the same time, notably in 2008. In the current situation, though, it is playing out in our favor in that our fixed assets are up, and they are somewhat counteracting the decline in our risk assets. The situation is of course very volatile. So I am in pretty frequent contact with Jason, our investment consultant, and RVK, And every time I talk to him, the market has moved a little bit. And so this morning when I chatted with him, the overall portfolio was down about 1% year to date, calendar year to date. So roughly flat. And we do benefit from the fact that this portfolio was constructed largely in 2022. So before that, we were invested in some Vanguard index funds, and then we moved into these pension-like assets that are very similar to VPIC. And so since 2022, there have been pretty significant gains. And so the portfolio, before the recent volatility had been up, about 40%. So even with the, modest decline that we've seen recently, we're still in pretty good shape overall. And I would just also emphasize that staff are monitoring this. We're keeping a close eye on things. As with VPIC, we are recommending that we stay the course and stick to our long-term strategy. But rest assured that we are following the markets. We are in very frequent contact with RBK, and we will watch the situation very closely. And then I guess the only other thing really to highlight is that the OPEB plan is in the enviable position of having significant positive cash flows. So the ADEC payments that are coming into the plan are much greater than the payments that we are having to pay out for insurance premiums. And so we are not in a position where we are having to even consider selling securities now due to those positive cash flows. So we're not having to contemplate what it means to sell securities when they are seeing decreasing prices. So happy to answer any questions, but that's an overview of the portfolio for you at the moment.
And part of the strategy is to make sure you do have that cash flow. If the ADEC wasn't matching that, we would be in a situation where you would have to sell equity then.
Yeah, if we were in a situation where we were having to, where we were cash flow negative, that would certainly impact our strategy. We would probably invest, a little bit differently. And I think Eric was sort of mentioning that, they have, they make sure that they have some bonds and they have some pieces that are more liquid so that if they, they need to raise cash, they can do so. But yeah, the risk, if you're having negative cash flows is that you end up that the market is being down and you have no choice but to sell at those, depressed prices and to take those losses. In our case, we don't even really have to think of, there's plenty to think about and plenty to monitor, but we don't even really have to worry about that because the cash flows are almost, twice, the cash inflows are about twice what the outflows are. So we're in a very strong position in that regard.
Excellent. Other questions? Jeremiah, thank you. I appreciate the update.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay, Tim, we'll shift over to you for the director's update.
Great, thank you. And very much appreciate both VPIC and Jeremiah making themselves available on short notice. I know, a lot of the items in the director's update are probably of interest, but with the wild times we're seeing in the market right now, I figured what was on everyone's mind is what is on everyone's mind. So I won't belabor the points in the director's memo, but I felt like there were a lot of items that we've been working on through the fall and winter, and I just wanted to bring folks up to date on them. Some of the things to highlight are the RMD cleanup work. That came about because we thought, we hadn't looked back for a while and done a real scrub of making sure that we caught all of the RMD ages. It was particularly important now because as many of you know, those have crept up. The federal government increased the RMD age incrementally over the past couple of years. So as those ages move, we wanted to go back and make sure that we had not missed anyone who, may have met one age in a year, but not the other. It created for a little bit of a confusing time, and we did miss a handful of them. We worked with outside counsel on the method to address those and have implemented a process to do that. And we're getting them all processed this spring. We've also revisited our general RMD process to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So, it kind of makes me laugh. Justin might as well, when we approached outside counsel and said, we found these problems. And then we said what the size and scope of it was. And I think she laughed and said, that's it. So I was grateful that, that was the reaction. But, we take it seriously, and we're putting in processes to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Are there any penalties that occurred because those RMDs were not done in the proper time frame?
Yeah, we have to pay interest on the amounts during the time when we should have paid it. So we did a process to calculate that interest. And then there's a tax implication for the individual, but our outside counsel helped us work through the process that's typically used in self-corrections like this. Is we draft a letter to share with the retiree, and it basically is a request from them to the IRS to waive the penalty. And it's with the support of our office that, we did make the mistake. And I don't know what's happened at the IRS these days. I'll put that one caveat that the world's kind of different, but historically our understanding is that those are generally honored, and the IRS would waive any penalties. Ultimately, it is the retiree's obligation to make sure they take their RMD, but we feel our obligation as well very strongly to make sure we process these in an appropriate fashion.
Right.
I'm hopeful tomorrow we're going to send a draft of our plan summary back to our vendors who are going to make our first plan summary. It's been, as we mentioned before, the VSTRS plan summary is the one we're doing first. And we've put a lot of work into making sure, it's remarkable how sometimes expressing something in plain, simple language can be among the most difficult challenges you have, because you have to make sure that nothing, that in that simplicity, nothing is inaccurate or misleading. So we've been working really hard to, and that it provides a fair picture of the important information. So we've been working pretty hard to distill that down, and are going to do another turn. I think things will pick up and we'll be moving to layout probably end of this month or early May. So hoping to have something to share with you by the summer on our first, nice glossy plan summary. Very excited to have that moving forward. The other couple points I just wanted to highlight is the work we did last year with RVK. We saw incredible value in doing that and importance in maintaining that kind of oversight of our supplemental plans, our 403B plan, particularly for this board. So we did an RFP process, and RVK was the best bid, and we just finalized a contract with them for all of the supplemental plans. So Monday we're having our kickoff meeting, and we expect to bring RVK to the May board meeting to chat about the work we're going to do going forward. And then last but not least, the server migration. We mentioned and I think did a contract amendment with LRS to move our pension administration system into the cloud instead of on-premises servers. Always a mildly terrifying weekend when a cutover goes forward. That was this weekend. Nicole led that effort, did a great job. This week we've been cleaning up, little nits and gnats, but it was certainly a success. Everyone's operating in the new environment, and very grateful that we're now in that new world. We think that the support we're going to get is going to be substantially improved. It's already been fantastic in, working through the little things that arise with anything like this, but very happy that it went well. It's always a bit of a risk kind of putting this note in a memo I write before the migration and then hoping everything goes right between that when I actually talk to you folks. So thank you, Nicole, for all the work on that. We'll talk about the medical review board. That's our next subject. I'm absolutely thrilled that we finally found the third doctor, and we're going to get that up to full speed. still too early to tell what July is going to look like. I think everything's kind of up in the air right now. And then the last point I wanted to make was the May meeting. We're going to have that in person. We've been working with our vendors to have a presence from Siegel, from Empower, and from RVK. But another thing we're going to try and do is just have an opportunity for people to meet, talk a little bit, and get to know each other and our vendors. To that end, the VSTRS meeting is the afternoon of the 8th. So we're going to have a lunch starting at noon, and I think that'll be an opportunity for the state board members at the end of their meeting and the teachers board members before their meeting. We can all have an opportunity to grab a sandwich and chat about whatever we want. And I think the vendors will be there as well. So kind of looking forward to having a little bit more of an opportunity to chat and get to know each other in addition to the work that we're going to get done. Of course, you can attend remotely if needed. The one thing we're going to ask, there's a little survey at the bottom of the memo to let us know if you're planning to be here in person. It'll help us just plan for space and food and whatnot. We'll be sending additional information about expense reimbursements or anything like that. Still figuring out some of that, shaking the dust off our in-person meeting stuff. And we will get that out to you. So there'll be reminders, but I just wanted to put some of the information here. Mr. Chair, you had also asked, we're still working to see if we can't get parking passes. I'm not sure if we're able to do that for the state lots, but we're going to give it a go. So more to come on those topics. So that's generally what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions on this and any other topics.
Okay, let's move on to the appointment of Dr. Rousseau.
Yeah, Dr. Roos. So I'm very grateful to the Vermont Medical Society. They've been very gracious to allow us to advertise in their weekly newsletter. And I guess the right person was looking at the right page of the newsletter at the right time. Dr. Roos is a recent retiree. He was the chief hospitalist and medical officer over at Northeastern Vermont Regional Hospital in St. Jay. He has been, he is at the end of his career. He just recently retired from that position, but is still, picking up a few shifts and working and keeping up his license. One of the most impressive aspects of Mr. Roos for our purposes is that one of the things he's decided to do in retirement is to do disability determinations for the Social Security Administration. Totally germane to what we do. And I think he'll bring a really great perspective and body of knowledge working with their system to help us as we develop our system. So Brianna Howard and I met with Dr. Roos last week. He sounds like he's a wonderful person. We're really excited to have him on board. Comes very highly recommended from folks I've talked to. And so we would recommend to the board a motion to appoint Dr. Roos to the Medical Review Board for a period of 2 years.
We have someone,
So moved.
Kevin made the motion. Emily seconds. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, there is no discussion. So all those in favor of appointing Dr. Roos to the Medical Review Board for a period of 2 years, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Okay, next item on the agenda, legislative update. What's happening in the Golden Dome?
I feel like I should ask Emily. I think that's a lot going on in education generally. Great. Happy that we're not in the middle of that. For our purposes, it's much more modest this year. The last meeting, we talked about the potential for an extension of Act 173. That's the program where retired educators are allowed to collect their full pension and a full salary for a year. That program was a one-year program that was passed in 22. There were two potential one-year extensions that were allowed. So that was fiscal 23, 24, and 25. I think our belief, and I know the board's from last meeting, is that it should sunset. There was the motion you passed last meeting was very helpful when I went over to House Education when there was an effort made to put a further extension into the miscellaneous education bill. We were able to convey the board's position on the topic, and the education committee, the House Education Committee, decided not to include it in the miscellaneous education bill. There's a subsequent effort for a floor amendment, which did not pass. So the House miscellaneous education bill passed without any extension. I know that bill is up for discussion this week in the Senate. And we have someone on our team monitoring to see if there are any efforts to put this piece back in on the Senate side. I have not heard of any at this point, but it's something we continue to monitor. The only other thing I wanted to, well, a couple things. One is in the budget. I think it's always good to see that all of the requested funds that we're seeking for the ADEC, both pension and OPEB, have been put in and passed out of the House. So that is a great thing to see that consistent funding, maintained by the legislature. The waterfall language from Act 114 is the last item that I wanted to bring to your attention. We talked about that before. The waterfall language is the piece that says 25% of any surplus revenues will go to fund the future COLA enhancement for the teacher system. There's another 25% that goes into the state retirement system. That language originally in the House BAA was what we call not withstood. It was where they say, okay, let's just disregard that for this year. And so we pushed back against that in the Senate, and the Senate heard our position, and they changed the language to notwithstand the language. So they maintained the Act 114 construct of putting surplus revenues into both the state system and to fund the teachers' future COLA enhancement. Those two BAAs passed out of the full body, but they were vetoed. At this point, it's unclear to me whether or not there will be a BAA. There may not be this year, and so this issue will resurface in the budget. And in the House passed budget, we're back to where we started with the notwithstanding language in there. So we're going to continue to monitor this. I know that the labor groups are monitoring and advocating on this subject. But we wanted to bring to your attention that the issue is now going to be discussed in the Senate Appropriations Committee.
So it sounds like we've got a little bit of a bouncing ball going back and forth here, and not sure who's in control of the ball. Do we want to maybe, would it make sense to be proactive like we did with Act 173 and have the board make a motion that we support the current language in Act 114, and we want to maintain the language as written for the waterfall?
Mr. Chair, I'll just say that the sorry, brain fog moment here. The state board this morning did pass a motion to that effect, and that was unanimous. And I do think I think it's helpful for the legislature, as we saw with the Act 173. I think they take the guidance of these boards seriously.
Yeah, it seems to make sense to me. Other board members' thoughts? No, I hear no other thoughts. So I would like to make a motion that that the board express the desire to maintain the Act 114 language concerning the waterfall and funding of excess funds.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And Bill or Tim, you can clean up that motion to make it sound a little bit better. It's fine with me. But we get the gist. Discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing no discussion. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Excellent. Any other legislative updates?
None from me. Gavin, anything on your end?
No, I don't think so, Tim.
Got a lot of April and May left. Unfortunately. Okay, next item on the agenda, upcoming trainings memo.
Yeah, and this one is just really there for your information, potential trainings. We do have some budget for folks to do trainings. We did put on, to be comprehensive, a training that is located in Honolulu. I would not recommend that folks go to that one. But some of these are the ideas of trainings that are out there. To the extent you know of anything else, we're happy to discuss if you're interested. So please let us know. If I know John will always speak to the value of these trainings, and I will as well. So happy to work with you if you're interested in attending one.
Excellent. All righty, next item on the agenda. Any other business to come before the board?
I think I'll just remind you, keep an eye out. We will be sending something out for May, just so a reminder with the survey, and please let us know if you're able to come. That'll just help us plan.
Yeah, lunch at noon and meeting starting at 1.
Yep.
And more specifics to come in terms of parking and reimbursements and that kind of thing. Perfect. Any other info needed for the board? All righty, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
I'll second. Okay, we got a second and a third. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks so much, everybody. We got a little bit of sun still out there. So enjoy the afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
You.
Thanks, folks.